2026 is a year defined by one word: urgent. Across continents, headlines repeat the same grim theme: shortages, hunger, and economic pain. Global hunger surged by 10% compared to 2025, according to the United Nations. Nearly 900 million people now face acute food insecurity, the highest number since records began. In 2024, this number was just over 700 million. This is not just a statistic, it's a swelling chorus of empty stomachs. We see stark contrasts. In wealthy cities, supermarket shelves hold abundance, while in places like Sudan and Yemen, families ration a single bowl of rice. The global food price index soared 22% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. Wheat and rice hit their highest prices since 2011. In some regions, basic goods like bread and cooking oil have doubled in cost compared to last year. It's easy to overlook the scale of this crisis from the comfort of a stable country. But the numbers tell a harrowing story. Millions more are being pushed from poverty into hunger, their lives shaped by forces far beyond their control. This is more than a food crisis. It's a crisis of time. The world is running out of it. The invisible crisis of 2026 is not just about empty plates. It's about a world teetering on the edge, its safety nets fraying, and the clock ticking faster than ever before. The crisis escalated in February when a flare-up in the Persian Gulf forced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway usually carries 1/5 of the world's oil and a huge share of global fertilizer shipments. When the tankers stopped, the shockwaves hit every continent. By March, oil prices spiked 40%. Fertilizer exports from the Gulf dropped by half, sending futures markets into a tailspin. It's not just about oil. The Strait is a lifeline for ammonia and urea, key ingredients in the fertilizers that grow our food. When production halted, global supply chains buckled. Ships sat idle in ports from Dubai to Mumbai. Insurance costs for ships soared, and rerouting added weeks to delivery times. Every delay meant farmers from Nigeria to Brazil paid more for the nutrients that make crops grow. The ripple effect was swift. Countries that import most of their food, like Egypt and Bangladesh, faced immediate shortages. Governments scrambled to negotiate new routes, but prices only climbed higher. The closure was not just a regional crisis, it became a flashpoint for the world economy, turning local tensions into a global emergency. For millions, the closure of the Strait was the moment the invisible crisis became impossible to ignore. By April, the fertilizer shortage was hitting hard. Crop yields in major breadbaskets, Ukraine, India, and Brazil, fell by 15 to 25% compared to previous years. The harvest was simply not enough. The Food and Agriculture Organization reported a global cereal shortfall of 14 million tons. Smallholder farmers were the first to suffer. Without affordable fertilizer, they planted less or watched their fields wither. In Ghana, maize production dropped 18%. In Indonesia, rice farmers sold livestock to buy just a fraction of their usual fertilizer. Commercial farmers in the United States Midwest and Europe also felt the pinch, but governments stepped in with subsidies, an option poorer nations couldn't afford. Food prices responded with brutal speed. In Africa and Southeast Asia, the cost of staples jumped by as much as 40%. Across Latin America, protests erupted as families struggled to afford bread and beans. The United Nations warned that a cascade of crises was underway, with no quick fix in sight. The invisible thread that connects fertilizer to food and food to security was now fraying in plain sight. The crisis is most visible where hunger bites hardest. The 10 most critical hotspots, Sudan, South Sudan, Nigeria, Gaza, Yemen, Afghanistan, Haiti, Ethiopia, Syria, and Somalia, now account for over half of all emergency food aid needs. In Sudan, fighting has displaced 5 million people, overwhelming aid camps. In Gaza, blockades and bombardments have left 80% of families skipping meals. In Nigeria's northeast, conflict and drought have pushed millions into famine-like conditions. In Afghanistan, a deadly combination of sanctions and drought means children beg for scraps in city streets. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, mothers line up for hours hoping for a sack of flour that may never arrive. Stories from these places are heartbreakingly similar. "My children ask for food I cannot give," says Salma, a mother of 4 in Somalia. Each statistic hides 100,000 stories of loss, hope, and resilience. These hotspots are not just on the map. They are the fault lines where the world's invisible crisis is laid bare for all to see. Children bear the brunt of this crisis. In 2026, UNICEF estimates that 148 million children worldwide are suffering from acute malnutrition. That's up 16% from 2025. In Yemen alone, 2.3 million children under 5 are at risk of dying from hunger-related causes before the year ends. For these children, every day without enough food is honestly a gamble with their lives. At feeding centers in Sudan and Gaza, doctors are reporting record numbers of severely wasted children. Many are just too weak to stand or even cry. The long-term effects are devastating: stunted growth, weakened immunity, and impaired brain development. In Nigeria, school attendance has plummeted as children work or beg to help their families survive. The crisis is, in a very real sense, stealing futures. "We are losing a generation," says Dr. Mariam Ahmed, a pediatrician in Sudan. Her words echo across continents, a warning that the world cannot afford to ignore. For every headline, there are thousands of children whose stories may never be told, but whose suffering shapes the fate of nations. The agencies meant to help are running on empty. In 2026, the World Food Program faced a record $7.8 billion funding gap. That's enough food aid to feed over 40 million people left unfunded. In previous years, donors stepped up during crises. Now, with competing emergencies and economic downturns, pledges are falling short. WFP has had to cut rations in Yemen, Syria, and Ethiopia. In Haiti, thousands of families were told there would be no more food deliveries for months. "We are making impossible choices every day," says Cindy McCain, executive director of WFP. "Do we feed the hungriest, or do we feed the most vulnerable children? There is simply not enough to go around." This funding crisis is a silent killer. As aid dries up, malnutrition rates climb, and the risk of famine grows. The world is not just facing a food crisis, it's facing a crisis of compassion and will. Without urgent action, millions more will fall through the cracks. Climate change is the silent force pushing this crisis to new extremes. In Kenya, 2026 brought the 5th straight year of failed rains. The result, the worst drought in living memory. Crops withered, livestock died, and families abandoned their homes in search of water and food. The United Nations reports that over 4 million Kenyans now depend on food aid. In Pakistan, the opposite problem struck. Catastrophic floods displaced more than 2 million people in Sindh and Punjab provinces. Fields that should have fed millions were ruined. Disease and hunger followed the floodwaters, compounding the country's economic woes. These disasters are not isolated events. Scientists call climate change a force multiplier because it turns existing crises into full-blown catastrophes. Droughts, floods, and storms are becoming more frequent and more intense, making it harder for vulnerable communities to recover. The data is clear. Without tackling climate change, every other solution will fall short. Solving the invisible crisis of 2026 requires more than food. It demands smarter logistics, urgent diplomacy, and new technology. Humanitarian agencies are racing to reroute supplies around blockades. Some are using drones to deliver aid to isolated villages in Sudan and Ethiopia. Peace talks, especially in hotspots like Gaza and Sudan, are more urgent than ever. Technology offers new hope. AI-powered platforms are now predicting crop failures before they happen, helping agencies pre-position aid where it's needed most. In Kenya, an early warning system alerted farmers to drought risks, allowing some to switch crops and save their harvests. But these solutions need funding and political will to scale. The private sector is stepping up too. Companies are donating supply chain expertise and funds to speed up food deliveries. But these efforts, while promising, are not enough on their own. Only collective action, across governments, agencies, and communities, can turn technology and goodwill into lasting change. 2026 has shown the world what happens when crises go ignored for too long. The statistics are staggering, the stories heart-wrenching. Yet, amid the pain, there is hope. Human ingenuity, compassion, and data-driven action can change the course of this crisis. The solutions are clear: fund food aid fully, invest in climate adaptation, deploy technology, and, above all, make peace. Every dollar, every day, and every decision counts. The invisible crisis is a test of our collective humanity and resolve. As the world stands at this crossroads, the choice is ours. Will we let time run out, or will we act, together, before it's too late? The clock is ticking, but hope remains. The world must not run out of time.